What is up, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, to the Be Great Podcast, episode 42. What we got for you here today? Got a little something special. Got a little something special that you maybe won't expect. We are going to do a first round mock draft for the NFL. And you might be saying, oh, but this is a college football podcast. It is a college football podcast. And guess what? These players were just in college, so we're doing it because I love NFL draft season. And that's what we're in right now. We're in NFL draft season. Well, technically we're in the playoff season, but college is basically almost over. It'll be over on Monday. Sad face. Um, but yeah, I think what we're gonna do. So starting next week, I'm only gonna be doing one episode a week. I think I'm gonna have those uploaded on Wednesdays, and basically we're gonna do a lot of draft stuff. Obviously, next Wednesday I'm gonna go over the national championship game. But then after that, I'm gonna kind of do a lot of draft stuff, draft related stuff. And then once we kind of get past the draft, that's when I'll probably move into really getting into and talking about, you know, the spring games that are going to go on that are starting to be announced as far as the dates and early 2025 predictions. But firstly, before we get into this first round mock, so back, I say back when, but it really was last week. Carson Beck announced he's transferring to Miami. And I remembered that I had predicted that in an earlier episode, and I was trying to figure out what episode it was. And I figured it out. I figured it out earlier today. Episode 26. It was I was basically talking about, I was reviewing the Georgia Ole Miss game. That was a disaster. It was episode 26, and it was at minute 17. It was at 17:50, so minute 17 seconds and 17 minutes and 50 seconds. I can't talk apparently, but yeah, episode 26, 17 minutes and 50 seconds. That's where it's at. But, anyways, we're going to get into this first round mock. I'll give you my thoughts, and we will, because look, you're going to see how obsessed I am with the NFL draft. I'm quite obsessed. I get a little obsessive about it this time of year. But, and obviously the picks are mostly locked, except the teams that are still in the playoffs. Obviously, those are not set. But let's get into this. So first up with pick 1, we have the Tennessee Titans. Based off a lot of things I've heard early on here regarding the draft, it looks like they're going to be picking Cam Ward. That's how it's sounding. Look, this is a terrible quarterback class. Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders they better be the only two quarterbacks picked in the first round. But even them, I'm not very high on or confident about. So, but I think Tennessee is going to look to get a quarterback, and I think it's going to end up being Cam Ward, just because it sounds like they like Cam Ward more than Shedeur. So we're going to go Cam Ward. Now, if it was me and I had the first overall pick, I'm going Travis Hunter no matter what. That's just my opinion. But, I obviously am not in that position. By the way, this mock draft will involve no trades. It's way too early, in my opinion, to be doing trades, especially when the order's not even fully locked in. So this is just going to be straight up. The Browns with the second pick. I think they also go quarterback in this position, and I'm going to go Shedeur Sanders. Although there's been a lot of talk, that Deion's going to make sure that Shedeur does not get drafted to the Browns, and he's going to make sure that he gets drafted to the Raiders. So I could totally see the Raiders, trade up to this spot to get Shedeur. But because I'm not doing trades, Browns need a quarterback. I'm not taking all that outside stuff into consideration this far away from the draft. I'm just going to go Shedeur Sanders here for the Browns. And then you move on to the Giants. Obviously, the Giants would love to get a quarterback. Obviously, They released Daniel Jones because he's a scrub. They have Drew Lock right now as their starter, and they have Danny DeVito. Is it Danny? Wait, no, his name's not Danny DeVito. It's Tommy DeVito. I don't know why I was saying Danny DeVito like he's an actor. Tommy DeVito. But I can't imagine they go Jalen Milroe with a third overall pick. I mean, that would just be a travesty of all travesties. And I think they might just choose best player available. They could use a corner and they could also use a wide receiver. So why not get someone who can do both? I'm going to go Travis Hunter. The New England Patriots. So a few of their biggest needs. What are the biggest needs? So a corner opposite of Christian Gonzalez. You're talking an offensive tackle. You're talking another wide receiver because they have a bunch of mid wide receivers. And you're talking maybe an edge rusher because they obviously traded away. Was it Uche that they traded away? Josh Uche? To me, Abdul Carter just feels like a Patriot. Does he not? Abdul Carter feels like someone that Mike Vrabel and the Patriots would love to have on that defense. So I'm going to go Abdul Carter, edge rusher out of Penn State. He's a monster. The Jacksonville Jaguars. To me, this is between Mason Graham out of Michigan or Will Johnson out of Michigan. One a defensive tackle, one a corner. I'm going to simply go with who I think the better player is, and I think that's Mason Graham. So I'm going to go Mason Graham to the Jaguars. Then we get to the Raiders. I think if it's not possible for them to get a quarterback here at the 6th spot, I could see them going with a wide receiver in Tetairoa McMillan out of Arizona. Some other options that are possible. They could pick a Will Johnson. I don't think they'll go offensive line. Ginty would be interesting, but I just don't see it. Luther Burden, I guess, but I think McMillan is kind of just the locked in number one wide receiver that's going to be taken. So I'm going to go Tetairoa McMillan for the Raiders. Then we get to the Jets at 7. Offensive tackle will be tempting here. They could get the best offensive tackle off the board, which I believe to be Kelvin Banks out of Texas. They could go edge rusher, with a Michael Williams, a James Pierce Jr. I don't think they go wide receiver with McMillan gone, and there's not really a defensive tackle that I would take here. So I think I'm going to go the best offensive tackle on the board in the whole entire draft, and that's Kelvin Banks out of Texas. Then at 8 with Carolina, bunch of options available to them. I think, there's a ton of first-round edge rushers that I think are going to go, and they have their kind of pick of the litter other than obviously Abdul Carter. But, you have Michael Williams, a James Pierce Jr., a Jalen Walker, if that's where you see him playing, a Nick Scorton. That's really the main ones. You could go Luther Burden because they also need a wide receiver. To be honest, I wouldn't mind them going a Will Johnson or a Malachi Starks, both really good players. But I think they're going to go edge rusher. It's just a matter of which one. I'm kind of between Michael Williams and Nick Scourton. I think I'm going to go Michael Williams here, though. I think is he the best edge rusher on the board? I don't know. But I'm going to go Michael Williams in this spot here. Next is the Saints, someone who could also use an edge rusher, but also someone who could use a tackle. Will Campbell out of LSU's on the board. I do know there's been a lot of talks about whether he'll actually play guard in the NFL or whether he'll play tackle. They could go Will Johnson, a corner. They could use another corner. But again, edge rusher is just such a huge need for this team. And for some reason, I've been having this feeling because something with the Saints, every year when the Saints come around for these mock drafts, I feel like I just get a vibe of who the Saints are going to pick. because they just seem like a Saints player for some reason. And that's how I feel about Nick Scorton. He just feels like a player that the Saints are going to pick. So I'm going to go with him. The Bears. I think the Bears pick Will Campbell 100% here. Whether you want to play him at tackle or in the interior at guard spot, it doesn't matter because you need both positions. So I'm going to go Will Campbell for the Bears. 49ers are another team, need an edge, need a tackle. Edge and tackle are common themes, if you cannot tell, in this first round. However, the 49ers also need something else. They could also use a corner. They're probably going to be losing Charvarius Ward in the offseason here. So I could totally see Will Johnson for them. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to pick Will Johnson for the 49ers. The Dallas Cowboys, look, everyone and their mother is picking the Ginty for the Cowboys. And I'm going to do the same because it feels like a Jerry Jones pick. It feels like a Cowboys pick. Ginty has said that he would love to be a Cowboy. So I think, and running back is probably by far their biggest need. So even though I don't love picking running backs in the first round, Ginty feels like one of those exceptions. So I'm going to go Ginty for the Cowboys. And then the Dolphins are an interesting one. They could use an edge rusher like a James Pierce Jr., like a Jalen Walker. They could use a safety like Malachi Starks. They could use a tackle. So can everyone. The best tackle left on the board, though, is probably Josh Simmons out of Ohio State. Malachi Starks is simply a better prospect than Josh Simmons at this point, and safety is a big need for the Dolphins, especially because they will possibly be losing Javon Holland in free agency. So I'm going to go Malachi Starks for the Dolphins. The Colts, I think the Colts would pick Malachi Starks if he falls to them, but this is definitely a great backup plan. I think Tyler Warren is one of those who just feels like a Colt. Tyler Warren just feels like a Colt. And I think that's 100% what they pick here. A lot of people thought that they would get Brock Bowers last year, but obviously Brock Bowers got picked by the Raiders, which was surprising. But I think the Colts will pick Tyler Warren with this spot. And then we get to the Falcons. Now, the Falcons need an edge rusher, and they also need a linebacker. Typically, for this spot, I would pick James Pierce Jr., but because the Falcons need an edge rusher and a linebacker, why not get someone who, at the University of Georgia, in the same state, who played both positions? He played stand-up linebacker and he played edge rusher, and that would be Jalen Walker, and that's what I'm going to go for the Falcons. Cardinals, this is a player that just kind of feels like he would be. I've been mocking, in all the mocks I've done, I've kind of had this player ironically going to the Cardinals for weeks now, and that's James Pierce Jr., so I'm going to do it again here. I think edge is going to be a hot commodity in the early parts of this first round. And then we get to the Bengals. This player kind of feels like a lock for the Bengals at this point, and that's Kenneth Grant, the other defensive tackle from Michigan. The Bengals really need players on that defensive line, and with edge being completely picked through for this first round, I think Kenneth Grant is the obvious option here. They could pick Luther Burden. I could totally see that, especially if they lose T. Higgins in free agency. But I think Kenneth Grant is a more desperate need for the Bengals. Seattle Seahawks, another one where I've had this player mocked to the Seahawks for feels like weeks now. They really need help on that offensive line. So I'm going to go the best offensive lineman available, in my opinion, and that's Josh Simmons, offensive tackle out of Ohio State. The Buccaneers at pick 19. The Buccaneers are one where I've had Jalen Walker actually picked to go to them quite a bit, but I think Jalen Walker, his value has kind of went up, so that's why he's going earlier now in my mocks. I think Luther Burden again could be in play here, but I think there's bigger needs for the Buccaneers than wide receiver. McMillan looks like a really solid player. They'll have Mike Evans once more. They're probably going to lose Chris Godwin though in free agency. But again, you have McMillan, you have Evans. So I think they look towards the defensive side of the ball because the defensive side of the ball has been very suspect at times this season. They could absolutely look at linebacker or edge rusher. That front seven was not great at times, especially getting pressure on the quarterback. But I think there's more value in this spot at corner because you have, for example, a Benjamin Morrison out of Notre Dame available, a Siobhan Revell Jr. out of East Carolina available, a Jade Barron out of Texas available. And I'm going to have them picking Siobhan Revell Jr. out of East Carolina, the corner. The Denver Broncos. This one is, I feel like early on, there's been a ton of players where I've had them mocked to the same team for a while now because it just makes sense. And this is another one of those. I've had Colston Loveland to the Broncos for what feels like forever now because I think Sean Payton will love the value that Colston Loveland brings. And so I'm going to go Colston Loveland, the tight end out of Michigan, for Denver. And then it's my team, the Pittsburgh Steelers. Oh, man. I think you have one of two options. You either go wide receiver, which would be Luther Burden or Emeka Egbuka, or you go corner, which would be Benjamin Morrison out of Notre Dame. I think in this spot, Luther Burden is too much of a value at the wide receiver position for the Steelers to pass up, and I think they would go Luther Burden. So that will be my pick, the wide receiver out of Missouri. The Chargers, obviously the Chargers would love for Colston Loveland or Tyler Warren to fall to them, but in this mock that has not happened. So I think they'll switch up and go to the interior of the defensive line, which is another spot where they really need players. And there's really two that you could decide from here, Derek Harmon or Shamar Stewart or Walter Nolan, to be fair. I think oh man, it's just a matter of who you think who is better. I lean Shamar Stewart. He was great at Texas A&M this season, so I'm going to go Shamar Stewart for the Chargers. Green Bay Packers, also a team that needs interior defensive linemen, but also a team that needs corner, especially with Jair Alexander constantly being injured. And Eric Stokes has had his fair share of injuries as well. But I just have a feeling that they're going to go interior of the defensive line. And in my opinion, that would mean I think they go Derek Harmon out of Oregon here. And then I think this lines up perfectly for the Vikings. I love mocking this guy to the Vikings. I think this would be a tremendous pick for the Vikings, and that's Benjamin Morrison, the corner out of Notre Dame. The Vikings could really use a corner, and Benjamin Morrison, even though he was hurt for a large part of the season, he's a great player. Texans, possibly losing Stephon Diggs. Nico Collins is getting older. Tank Dell has really taken a step back in his second year, unfortunately. So Emeka Egbuka could be an option, but I just think there's more important needs for the Texans, specifically their offensive guard spot and, once again, the interior of their defensive line. And honestly, I'm between going Walter Nolan, defensive tackle out of Ole Miss, or Tyler Booker, who's the number one guard in this class out of Alabama. And I think I'm going to go Tyler Booker here. Just make sure you protect CJ Stroud, who's supposed to be your star, at all costs. The Bengals learned that lesson the hard way. The Rams. The Rams are a fun one. So to me, there's two options here. Because I think they go offensive tackle with Ariante Ursary out of Minnesota, or corner with Jahdae Barron, who I love out of Texas. I think Jahdae Barron is a star. I think he could be amazing in the NFL. Um, but Matthew Stafford's only getting older, and you're just going to need to protect him because he's a statue. So I'm going to go Ariante Ursary, the offensive tackle out of Minnesota. And then we come to the Commanders. Who do we go here? I've had this player mocked to the Commanders for weeks now. It just makes sense to me, and that's Emeka Egbuka, wide receiver out of Ohio State. You pair him up with another receiver from Ohio State, Terry McLaurin. Emeka Egbuka spent his entire college career as a number 2 option. First to Marvin Harrison Jr. and now to Jeremiah Smith. And I think this would be perfect for him because I don't love him on the Steelers because while he is the second option to George Pickens has not been reliable enough, and we would need Emeka Egbuka to step up. And I don't know if he can. But in the Commander's system, he will always be the number 2 option behind Terry, and he's very used to that and has thrived in that spot at Ohio State. And so I really like the Commanders as a landing spot for Emeka Egbuka. And just another weapon for Jaden. The Ravens. How funny would it be if the Ravens picked Jalen Milroe? Almost a Lamar clone, huh? But I'm not gonna do that, obviously. If Jalen Milroe gets picked in the first round, I might kill over. For them, offensive line is a big need, as is defensive line for them. So I'm kind of looking at a Walter Nolan or a Josh Connerly Jr., who's a tackle out of Oregon. I think I'm going to go Josh Connerly Jr. I think the offensive line is just a massive need for the Ravens. So I'm going to go Josh Connerly Jr., the tackle out of Oregon, for the Ravens. For the Bills, this is easy. Interior, the defensive line, massive need. And if Walter Nolan's right here, you got to take him. So I'm going to go Walter Nolan for the Bills. The Philadelphia Eagles. Now, my brother-in-law is an Eagles fan. And if he listens to this, I don't want to disappoint him with my pick. So I have to make sure I do this correctly. So I have told my brother-in-law 1,000 times that the Eagles need a linebacker. I understand that Nakobe Dean's a good player. I know this. I'm a Georgia fan. But he's constantly injured, and he's not reliable. And yes, while Zach Bond has played surprisingly well this season, is that going to be consistent, or is it just a one-time thing? And I don't think it ever hurts to have depth at that position, especially considering the fact that Nakobe continues to get hurt. And I continuously every season, every week this season, have seen the Eagles pick up a linebacker off of free agency because they need bodies. And so with that being the case, and just to tell you what I'm between picking Jahad Campbell, who is the number 1 linebacker in this class out of Alabama, Cameron Williams. He could be eventually Lane Johnson's replacement at the offensive tackle position, and Cameron Williams is a tackle out of Texas, or Mike Green, who's an edge rusher out of Marshall. Bryce Huff has kind of been a disappointment for Philadelphia this year. Nolan Smith is still, he's still progressing. He's a young guy, and obviously they don't have Hassan Reddick anymore. So I feel like Mike Green could be really good opposite of Nolan or Bryce Huff, however you want to do it. But I think I'm going to go Jahad Campbell. I think he'd be really good on that Eagles team, and I think they could really use bodies at that linebacker position to really shore up that defense. So give me Jahad Campbell. Oh boy, the Kansas City Chiefs, huh? I think this is where you see Cameron Williams, the tackle out of Texas, go. They could really use an offensive tackle, and I think they would jump at picking Cameron Williams here. And then the Lions, they have the Lions at 32 spot, winning the Super Bowl. Makes sense. Makes sense. So Lions could really use players on the defensive line. I mean, their defense has been killed by injuries. Has been out most of the season, and they don't have really anyone opposite him, and they also don't have much depth other than Aleem McNeil in that interior of that defensive line. So Mike Green, I think they would sprint to the podium to pick Mike Green, but I will say Landon Jackson, the edge out of Arkansas, just feels like a Lions player. He feels like a Dan Campbell type of guy, but I think Mike Green is simply better, so I'm going to go Mike Green for the Detroit Lions at 32. That has been your first round mock draft. I will continue to be doing mock drafts up to the NFL draft. I will not be doing one next week. That will be solely about the national championship. And then I think what we'll do after that, I'll give you fully my plans for this offseason next Wednesday after the national championship, after I have reviewed the game. But we're going to be doing a lot of draft stuff. We're going to be doing multiple mock drafts, first round, second round, specific teams, yada, yada, yada. And I'll also specifically get into each position and give you, these are who I think the 10 best offensive tackles in the draft are, yada, yada, yada. And we'll be doing that just until the NFL draft is over and all that jazz. And then, you're talking May is when we'll really get into the nitty gritty about, the spring games for all the teams, because all those will have happened. And then we'll get into some early 2025 predictions and start really getting into 2025 and the 2025-2026 season. So, yeah, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I love the NFL draft. I mean, you heard me just yapping away. And, yeah, I hope everyone has a tremendous Friday, has a tremendous weekend. Enjoy the national championship game on Monday. And I will be talking to you guys again on Wednesday. Have a great day.